Again, everyone, for being with us. Um, the title of the talk today, as it came to me, and I was trying to figure out, well, how can I put that down in a few words? What came to me was Heir or Interloper. Think about behavior. See, we judge ourselves by our actions. We judge others by their behavior, and they judge us by our behavior. So think about our behavior, your behavior, as you reflect upon yourself. And ask yourself, if you were a third party, if you were a distant observer, a witness, as we're taught in meditation, if you were just observing this person without an attachment to the identity that it's you, but if you were just observing this person, do their actions tell you whether they think they belong? They're an heir or a rightful heir to this life that they have inherited? Or are they acting like a stranger, like an interloper, like somebody who feels like an uninvited guest, And sometimes with uninvited guests, it's interesting if you've ever had the occasion where one of your friends kind of dragged you along to a party and said, well, I've got to stop here for a little while, but come on in, you'll be welcome. And you feel awkward, nobody invited you. You're just there. I came with so-and-so, and we're just going to be here for a few minutes. You feel kind of like you shouldn't be there. Maybe you shouldn't eat any of the food. Maybe you shouldn't have any of the drinks, Because after all, the other type of uninvited guest is the wedding crasher, They're there, they're not invited, they know they weren't invited, but they're going to make the most of it until they're caught, right? They're going to be boastful, they're going to be loud, they're going to eat a lot, they're going to drink a lot, they're going to dance a lot, and they're just going to have a good old time because they know that they're taking something, or they feel like they're taking something that they shouldn't be taking. But when we feel like we belong, when we feel like we are in our right place at our right time, this is what I mean by belonging. Do you feel like you're in the right place? Do you feel like now is the time? One of my grandsons, one day we were driving, and he just, out of the blue, he said to me, if you could be born, if you could choose when you would be born, if you could choose any period in history when you would be born, when would you choose to be born? And I had, never quite thought about that before. And I said, I kind of think that I would choose the same time, that I would choose to be born about the same time that I was born. And I explained to him, all of the reasons why it just felt right to me. It just felt right to be here in this body, in this place, and at this time. But so much of life, so much of what people go through is they wish they were someplace else. They wish they were doing something other than they're doing. They wish that they had a body other than the body that they have. When I was beginning my career in finding your life mission, which was, Lori and I were helping people try to figure out what it is that they really wanted to do with their lives. What is it really, kind of Joseph Campbell's follow your bliss? What is it that you're just in love with? What is it that you would just do if money were not the goal here? What is it that you would do? We give people an exercise. If the sweepstakes van pulled up in your driveway and all those people came running up with the $11 million check for you, you never had to work again a day in your life. After you spent the first year just traveling, which most people would say they would do, what are you going to do then? What are you going to do then? Everything's taken care of. You have no worries. What are you going to do then? What is it that fulfills you? And of course, what we would find as you go through life is that most people just don't feel like they're where they want to be. They want to be someplace else. They feel like they belong someplace else. Some of the philosophers tell us that human beings act as if we've just been thrown into this world. We're just here, and we don't quite understand why. We don't quite understand how. We don't quite understand where we fit in. And we spend our whole lives just trying to find our place, at the table. Is this right? Is that right? One day, I was at work, and they had the fire drill, I'm sure you've all been through it. They had the fire drill, and everybody has to evacuate, and you go out into the parking lot, and you stand under your particular sign, whatever code your group happens to be. And I was looking around, and there was, literally thousands of people out in the parking lot. And I turned to one of my coworkers and I said, wouldn't it be really great if when they gave the all clear and everybody heads back into that building, if instead of going to the desks that have the job that we're assigned to, that everybody went to the desk that they really wanted to go and do the job that they really wanted to do, rather than the one that they felt they had to do? And my friend laughed at me and he said, if that was the case, nobody'd go back in that building. And he was serious, Most of the people in that building did not want to be there. They all wanted to be someplace else. So this is what I'm talking about. Do we feel like an heir? Do we feel like we belong? Do we feel like we're in the right place? Do we feel a certain sense of entitlement? And I'm not talking about greedy entitlement, like you could say the gangsters have a sense of entitlement. They think that they're entitled to make money off of everything that happens in that neighborhood. Legitimate businessmen need to pay them protection and all those kind of things that you see in the TV shows. I'm not talking about that kind of entitlement. Not that the world owes me a living, but I'm talking about a sense of entitlement that says I belong. This is mine. I'm comfortable with the fact that this is mine. This house is mine. This car is mine. I just feel comfortable being here. So that's what we want to talk a little bit about today, because if we look at the religious teachings, the different philosophies and the different religions of the world, what they're telling us in some way, shape, or form, what they're telling us is that the things that go on in the external, or the exterior, or the circumference of life, we might call it, the things that are happening out there are really not the important things. That the really important things happen in here. Now, in here is, is kind of debatable. What does in here mean? We talked about that several weeks ago. What is in here? What is out there? But nevertheless, the concept is there. The concept is there, and it crosses cultures. There is a center, and there is a circumference in our human experience. But in our divine experience, the center is everywhere. The circumference is nowhere. God is everywhere present, and equally present everywhere. Not just some little part of God here in me and some little part of God over there in you. All of the power, all of the presence, everywhere present, right here and right now. So we come into the world, and when we come in as small children, and when we're born, there's no doubt. There's no doubt in our minds, There's this great miracle of nature, this great conspiracy, if you want to consider that, of nature, to take two tiny cells and to produce this magnificent body of an infant. How does it do that? How does that happen? Two cells become four, and four become eight, and some become eyes, and some become bones, and there is a natural guidance to this process. Frederick Bales, in his book Your Mind Can Heal You, tells us about this. If you ever if you ever doubt that there's an intelligence in the universe that knows what to do, think about the process by which the human body forms in our mother's womb. The little lungs that are developing are going to need to breathe the air that's already there, that's already been provided for them. There's an intelligence that knows that air is out there, and it prepares the body perfectly to breathe that. And the child's body in the mother's womb does not need to breathe air. It can't breathe air because it's surrounded by fluid, and it gets all the oxygenated blood it needs through the umbilical. But nevertheless, the little lungs start breathing, but they're breathing that fluid in and out. It strengthens them. It's kind of like going to the gym and lifting more weight than you have to lift on your job, so that when you get to the job, it's easy. It's easy. But there's a guidance, there's an intelligence. And as that little body comes down through the birth canal, its chest is squeezed tight, and all of that fluid is pushed out. So that as the chest expands, as the child enters the world, the lungs easily take in their first breath. And immediately as the baby is born, if you hand it to the mother and she brings it to her breast, it will nurse. No one has to tell it to do that. It doesn't stop and say, wait a second, am I good enough? Am I smart enough? Am I worthy to do that? It is just natural. It is just natural. And I just describe that because I want you to think of behaving in a way that is just so natural as being centered. Being centered for the purpose of today's discussion. Being centered. Not self-conscious, no doubt, no questioning whatsoever. The body needs to eat. The child accepts the food. The body needs to breathe. The child accepts the air. It is perfectly natural. It is perfectly centered. Watch the little ones when they sleep. There's something so peaceful about watching an infant sleep, a baby sleep. And watch where they breathe. They breathe at their belly. The belly comes up and the belly goes down. They breathe in, they breathe out. Later on, we learn to raise that. We kind of we become tense, and we kind of start breathing in our chest, and we start breathing in our lungs, and then we start breathing in the very top of our lungs. Sorry, I just hit that mic. I hope I didn't cause a thud. Our breathing becomes very shallow as we enter the world of school and work and business. And later you go to workshops and they tell you how to belly breathe, learn how to breathe back in your belly, try to get back into your center. We are taught, as we are growing, we are taught the human idea of love, not the divine idea of love. We talked about that a while ago as well. But we're taught the human idea of love. We start to move out of that natural center of our belly, and we start to move up into our hearts. Now we're learning a little bit how to love, but we're not learning entirely what love is. Love is still pretty much a human affair. It could be transactional, I love you if you'll love me back kind of thing. It could be a business relationship, like the monarchies marrying their children to one another to improve their wealth and maintain peace. It could be an emotional, needy kind of love. I love you because I feel so needed and wanted when I'm with you. So important. Could be all of those human concepts of love, but we start to learn that. We start to move out of our natural center. And then we get to the point where we have to move into the head, to the intellect, and life becomes dominated in our society, life becomes dominated by the intellect. We worship the intellect, and we worship busyness. Recently, there's been great discussion in school curriculum with funding cuts of cutting the arts and the humanities. And I heard a radio interview with the governor, the then governor of North Carolina, who was saying that they needed to cut funding for the humanities programs at the state colleges because the state really shouldn't be paying for people to take courses that didn't lead to good, high-paying jobs. Now that's, of course, the reason that sounded good and that he was giving. The real reason probably was that people who were in arts and humanities didn't vote the way he liked them to vote. But the reason it sounded good because in our society, if it comes from the head, if we think it's intellectual, we think it's important. If it comes from the heart, we tend to dismiss it. So from the time we're born, we're kind of drawn up, or our center kind of moves, if you want to consider a center. We start naturally centered around the navel, the third chakra, and we start to move up, and we get stuck in the head, and we get stuck into the worship of the head. And while we're working from the head, we are constantly trying to figure things out. We're constantly trying to analyze things and figure things out. Where do I fit? Where do I belong? How do I get the most out of whatever it is that I'm doing? How do I get the greatest return on my investment? And life starts to lose some of its luster. We're no longer living. We're no longer being. We're problem solving. Everything that comes to us then is a problem that has to be solved, a decision that has to be made. We have to bring in facts and data, we have to weigh them, we have to analyze them, we have to choose a course of action. And there's a certain emptiness to that. Now, I'm not saying that we stop doing the things that we need to do to make a living. What I'm saying is we shouldn't do them just from the head. That's what I'm saying. We're not doing them connected to the part of us that's really important, the part of us that is centered. So the mystics will tell us we're on the outside, we're on the circumference of the circle, and we're trying to make all our decisions and do all of our things there, and we're very, very busy, and we're moving around very, very quickly, and things are changing, and we're just consumed with activity at that level. And we've lost our center. We've lost our connectedness. I mean, just think about the imagery, of a child, of a baby's body developing in its mother's womb, and how is it connected? It's connected through the navel. Everything that it needs comes from that center. In other cultures, if you go to other cultures, and people say, I had an idea, they will point to their navel. In our culture, say, I had an idea, I'm thinking, right? We tap our heads, what were you thinking? Kind of a thing. Other cultures recognize that the intellect, that the head is not the true center. So we wander away. We tend to wander away from where we started, where we entered this world. And the further that we wander away, the more we feel like we don't belong. The more we feel like life is a problem that needs to be figured out and it needs to be solved. And some of us never figure it out and never solve it. And others finally figure it out and solve it, and then it's too late because their life is over. And what our religions and our philosophies are trying to tell us is we must come back to the center. We must find our own center, which is the place where we are naturally and easily and blissfully connected to all of life. So do we belong? Do we belong? We used to have a little catalog of iron-on decals for T-shirts for the children in the Sunday school. And the image had two small children talking to one another. And the caption said, "I must be good because God doesn't make junk. I must be good because God doesn't make junk." And I wish everybody had that decal. I wish everybody had a T-shirt with that decal ironed on. And we would put that shirt on once a week at least and go stand in front of the mirror until we believed it. Until we believed it. I must be good because God doesn't make no junk. I watched a documentary film. You know, I love films and I love documentary films. And Lori and I watched a documentary film not too long ago, and I believe the title is 20 Feet from Stardom is the name of the title. And the movie was produced, the executive producer, that is the person who paid to have the movie made, was a retired record producer, and he was near the end of his life. He was getting old, and I think he may have even passed before the film was finished, the editing process. It seems, at least what I read into the story when I heard it, is that he to me, he knew that he was coming to the end of his life, and he wanted to do something to honor the backup singers. 20 Feet from Stardom. These are the men and the women who are just behind the talent, and the talent, whoever the actor, the singer might be, that's the main talent, is out on the center stage. And up behind them, so in the camera shot, you usually catch the backup singers just, over the shoulder of the main talent. These are the people who come in the background, and they are the ones whose voices we remember. They are the ones who give the feeling to the song. The groove, you might call it, They're the ones who bring the emotion into it. And they're the ones we remember long after we can't remember the name of the person who sang that song. We can hear the sound of the background singers, the backup singers, in the back of our head. In fact, after we saw the documentary, I like to go on YouTube and I listen to different versions of the same song. Maybe the musician performed live before audiences in different places. And as they travel and they go on tour, sometimes they bring in different background singers. If you ever watch them, they may not have the same background singers with them as they go over the years, And what a difference the different background singers can make to the impression that song leaves on us. Now, in this movie, and I know I'm kind of going far afield here, but I'll get back to what we're talking about. In this movie, one of the ladies that they interviewed had been a background singer for Ike and Tina Turner in the early days, in the 60s. And in her later years, when they were making a documentary, she was now a minister. They didn't talk about what denomination or anything. They just showed her pastoring her church. But they interviewed her about what it was like, what it was like to be a backup singer, what it was like particularly to be a backup singer for Ike and Tina Turner. And she said something that just fascinated me. She said, here I am in the church environment. She says, I'm a pastor now. And we have a beautiful choir. And I would have no doubt that she would have a beautiful choir, as talented as a singer as she was or still is. She says, but in the choir, To be a good member of the choir, you have to know your own strengths, what your talents are, what your vocal range is. You have to understand all that. You have to understand the talents of other choir members. You have to understand the arrangement of the piece of music. She says, and then you have to step back and find your place in all of that. Not the place to dominate, not the place to be the big voice that booms out and is the star, but to add your voice to that blend of voices, to that mixture of voices that is the choir, to find your place where you can make the whole choir better. And I thought, wow. And she said, a good background singer has to do that. She says, you may not be singing, when you're singing background, you may not be singing that song in a manner that you would sing if you were standing out front and center on the stage, but you are finding your place in that ensemble. You are adding the instrument of your voice to all of the other instruments on stage, and you're doing so in a way, in a manner that makes the whole thing better than if you weren't there or if you were trying to be dominant. You got to find where you belong. You got to find your center. You got to find that place where you can give the gifts and talents that you came here to give, and where you can do so naturally. In order to do that, we have to recognize that we belong. We are not victims of life. You know, the philosophers say we act as if we have been thrown into it, and we do. We do. Human beings act as if we've been thrown into it. If you listen to people who are working through problems in their lives, you know, if you watch the news or if you're engaged in any type of counseling work, very often you will hear people say, well, I didn't ask to be born. I didn't ask for this. I didn't ask to be born. I was just kind of thrown into this situation, you know. And this is the kind of the victim mentality, or the world owes me a living mentality, you know. I didn't ask to be born. Sometimes your teenagers will say that to you, you know. You brought me here. Now you have to pay for me forever, you know. No, go out and get a job. Go to work. No, I didn't ask to be born. Your problem. You take care of me. And what we have to stop and realize is, do you really know that you didn't ask to be born? Really? You're just a biological accident, you know? Your parents had sex and boom, here you are, and it's not your fault and you're not responsible, and therefore you don't have to do anything. You don't belong. You don't fit in, you know. And I like to go back. Louise Hay, in one of her books, she said something that really helped me and has helped other people kind of move out of that, I call it a funk that we're in, you know. I don't belong, I don't fit, why am I here kind of deal. And she said, imagine that you chose. Imagine at a time before you were born, when you were in heaven's waiting room, waiting to come here, the green room, we would call it, a TV studio, waiting to go on stage. And you were waiting to come into this life, and you chose what it was that you wanted to do in this life. You chose what you wanted to give. You chose what you wanted to receive, what you wanted to learn, what you wanted to teach, what you wanted to share. And you chose the environment into which you were born. Now, there's absolutely no way that any of us could prove or disprove that, you know. But thinking about life in that manner, moves us out of the stuckness, moves us out of being the victim. and then moves us into, well, maybe I did. Maybe I did choose this environment. Maybe I did choose my parents. And then of course we beat our head and say, what was I thinking? One lady in our class, when she first heard that, she just bust out laughing, and she says, for the life of me, I cannot tell you why I would have chosen to be born where I was born when I was born into the environment in which I was born. She says, because it was a struggle all the way. But just that little shift of thinking, that instead of thinking I've just been thrown into this world and it's somebody else's fault, to thinking I am an important part of life. Just that little shift of thinking starts to move us out of problems and into joy and into bliss. So we have to stop and think. I invite you to stop and think for a minute. What has God made that doesn't have its place? I want you to think about this earth on which we live. What has God made that doesn't have a purpose or a place? I think it was Thomas Jefferson who said, a weed is a flower whose beauty we have not yet discovered. Everything has a purpose, everything has a place, and we just haven't discovered it yet. And in many cases, we don't even go looking for it. We take it for granted. But everything has a purpose, everything has a place. Humanity, in its ignorance and its greed, has come in and treated the environment as if it was a commodity to be used. This is the greedy kind of entitlement I'm talking about. We'll come in and we'll exploit all these resources. We'll pollute all the land and the water, and then we'll just take the money and run, kind of a deal. I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, and I still see articles about some of the waterways that were very familiar to us are Superfund sites, because businesses came in there and dumped all kinds of toxins in the ground and in the water, and then they left. But in its great wisdom and intelligence, nature has provided biological means to clean these things up. Now, that's not an excuse for pollution. My point is that everything has a place. There are tiny microbes, tiny single-celled animals that are taking the poison that we as human beings have dumped into the water and into the soil, and they're slowly but surely undoing the damage. Now, it's going to take thousands of years, but in the grand scale of geologic time, that's not a very long time. My point is that everything has its place, even those tiny single-celled organisms that we, through our intellect, didn't even know were there. And now we're trying to figure out how to multiply them and make them work faster and engineer them, the kind of things that the intellect does. How can I control this? Everything has its place. Everything has its place. I know I've used this before, shared this before, but it just absolutely fascinates me that the Arctic tern lives what is summer in the northern hemisphere, up in the Arctic. But when it's winter up there, it flies down to the middle of South America somewhere, and it nests down there. So it's summer in the southern hemisphere, and it migrates down there. And then in what is spring of our seasons up here in the northern hemisphere, at a moment in time that no one knows what decides it or how it's decided. It's most probably related to the cycles of the moon and the tides and things like that. But at some instant, and I lived on a waterway in New York City, and I can tell you I've witnessed this with the migrating birds. The birds would just start flying in, and the water the whole water that was there would just be covered for miles with nothing but birds. You could hardly see the water. There were so many birds there, and you could hear them. They were making noise, mostly ducks, and they were quacking all night long, and you could hear them. And then one day, as if somebody blew a whistle, they would lift off. Together, they would lift off. Somehow they knew. I don't know who was in charge. I don't know how they communicated, but boom, they were gone all together. And these Arctic terns will lift off from their nesting grounds in South America. And they will fly, it's 4,000 miles, and they will fly nonstop 4,000 miles to land in Chesapeake Bay, to stop, to rest, and to feed. And they land in Chesapeake Bay at the exact time that their food supply, the horseshoe crabs, have hatched. Each has its place. The horseshoe crab has its place. The Arctic tern has its place. But something brings them together. Something brings them together in a manner that's better for all. In a manner that's better for all. Now we can do something that they cannot do. We can move ourselves away from that connectedness, that center in which those animals live by instinct. Their instinct guides them. And human beings, as we have evolved, as our intellect has expanded, we have stepped away from instinct. But what is available to us is intuition. Now I realize that the intellect is going to say, well, intuition is just an old wives' tale. But is it really? Read Dr. Dean Radin's The Conscious Universe if you have any doubts about these things. So when we deliberately, even unconsciously, when we stay centered in our head, or we bounce back and forth between our head and our human ideas of love, and back and forth, we are separated from our intuition. We are separated from our center. We are separated from our place at the table. Our place where we come not to exploit, not to take all the resources we can and leave a mess behind, but our place of synergy where we interact with each other and we interact with all of God's creation in a manner that's for the highest good of all. Our religions and our philosophies are all in one way, shape, or another trying to tell us you have to get back to that center. Now the mythology of some of the, like the Adam and Eve in the garden, they've kind of been construed to mean we don't belong. We've been kicked out. We don't belong. We can't even trust ourselves. We can't trust our mind. We can't trust our intuition. Some religions tell people don't even close your eyes and meditate because the voices you might hear might be evil voices. So there's this whole approach to life that is built on not belonging and don't trust. And I think what we have to do is we have to get back to a much simpler approach, to a much simpler way. Rather than trying to work on the periphery and trying to fix everything out here and move around very rapidly, we have to go in and find our center and work from within to the without, so that everything that we do is coming from a place that is for the benefit of all. This is why Dr. Holmes simply tells us, does the thing you want to do give a greater expression of life and love and truth and beauty? Does it harm anyone or rob anyone? If it passes that test, then it's coming from the center. It's coming from the place of unity. So what we want to do is we want to understand that yes, we belong. Yes, there is a purpose and a place for everything that God creates. The simple blade of grass that became corn or wheat or rice or oats. There is a place for everything and a purpose for everything, and there is a place for us and a purpose for us. And God created us deliberately. We are not victims. We are not accidents. We haven't been thrown here to try to figure it out and then die. We are here to evolve. We are here to evolve our soul. And there's a part of us that knows that. And there's a part of us that knows what it is that we are here to do. So what we want to do is we want to find the practice or practices that help us to find our center, that help us to move from the chattering mind, to move through the emotions, and to come back to that place where we are connected. We are connected with everyone, with everything. We are connected with God. We can do that in meditation. We can find a meditation that works for us. One of the meditations we used to do at the center is we would ask people to start out physically, getting in touch with their physical nature. How does the chair feel on your back? How does the air feel on your skin? What is it that you're hearing outside? All of those kind of things. And then we would ask them to kind of take that and to ask, well, what do I feel emotionally? Get in touch with what you're feeling. Am I anxious about being here? Am I sad about something? Am I happy? Just acknowledge what you're feeling. Then we would ask them to observe the mental. What are you thinking? What thoughts are running through your head? Don't engage them, just be aware of them. And finally, we would ask them to expand past all of that and to get in touch with the spiritual. So all the other things were there, the physical, the emotional, the mental were all there, but then we come to a different place, which is the spiritual. Can you do that in a meditation? Can you start with your physical nature? Can you move in through your heart, through your emotional nature, through your head, through your intellect? And can you come into a place where you can find your center? Another meditation is to imagine the five senses and then to find the place within you, not within necessarily your body, but within you. Where do all of these five come together? Where do they meet? What is the common point where all of these things meet? Begin with a sound and try to trace the sound in from your ears, And do you recognize that the sound that you hear, wherever you hear it, the sound you hear is not your ear? Something vibrates the ear and then electrical impulse goes somewhere and then something interprets that. But where? Where is that? Where does this ringing in the ears come from, Once met a man who taught children to meditate, and that's where he started them. Get so quiet you can hear the noise in your ears. But then follow it in. Try to follow it in. What is it that you smell? Maybe you have incense burning. What is it that you smell? But smell, the sense of smell is not just a nose. Where does that come within you? Where does that sense of smell meet the sound, the sense of hearing? Try different ways. Try different techniques. Sometimes it's a place, sometimes it's a plant, sometimes it's a tree, sometimes it's a pet. What can you be with and just be with it? We started a few weeks ago talking about it doesn't have to be so hard. It doesn't have to be so hard. And then we talked about some simple guides for a joyful life. See, we've made it way too hard. Dr. Holmes tells us that a child experiences God on the playground. I love that little short subject going around Facebook now about eating Twinkies with God. If you haven't seen it, Google it, it'll come up. A child in its innocence is one with its friend on the playground. A parent holding a newborn child is centered and connected. A gardener working in her garden, tilling the soil, is connected. Think of a time in your life when you were connected, when you felt that connection actively. And if you don't feel it now, if you feel like an interloper, rekindle that connection until you find that you're an heir. We are all the prodigal son of the New Testament. We've all gone out on the peripheral. We have all wandered and tried to find our good in other circumstances. Now it's time to come home. Come back to the center. And we'll find that there's a loving God waiting there to say, welcome back. You were gone, but now you're back. And you're mine. And so it is.